Hello everyone, this is Josh Perry from King Dinosaur Games bringing you Devlog number 4, part 1 of 3. I'd like to thank everyone for their support in our Kickstarter campaign. It has gone exceptionally well and we are going to give you a great product at the end of it. Alright, let's move into the editor and start talking about modding and mod capabilities. So, this is the only overhauled screen we have inside the editor. After this, it's going to get a lot uglier. It's back to our alpha assets, which at one point were the GUI style for the entire game. So here we are showing our published scenarios. You'll see at the top there are 4 types listed: published, core, drafts, and templates. So templates, core is the scenarios that are published with the game itself. Anyone who's doing their own cannot mark their scenario as a core. Published is anything that you have on your machine that is marked as published. Either you've done it or you've downloaded it from the community. Draft is something you're working on that you don't think is finished and ready to be published or played. And template is the most unique of them. A template is not a scenario in and of itself, it is the base for one. So you might have found the perfect settings for a low fantasy, low tech scenario. So you create a template out of it, save it, and then you can share it around the community and people can make their own scenarios out of it. So you can create new, you can delete, you can modify general. General is the events and settings that apply to every scenario unless they otherwise decide not to partake in them. If you go to modify general, you get a blank screen with all the events that apply to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into the North Burns. It takes about 15 seconds or so to load. A lot of data and resources have to be loaded up. And as we get ready to jump in here, we're going to enter into the build screen, I believe is first. Yes. So there are 3 screens inside the editor: view, build, and edit. View is the screen that shows you what the player would be seeing in the scenario. Build is the most fundamental, and then edit has the most information inside of it. So you can see build right here. Build is where you make the map, not only by bringing in images, either maps, tiles, or other assets to place on the map, but also putting in the POIs, which are, as you know, the fundamental unit for our game. So if we take a look here, you'll notice that all the special effects are shut off. You can only see armies right now, though you can activate agents or heroes and see them. Oh, there's no agents, of course. The black boundary is the POI collider boundary, meaning that's where you can click to actually activate the POI. Every POI has different settings for this. The setting is global to the campaign, so if you were to modify the village, all of the POIs that are marked as a village would have their black boundaries changed. So talking about adding a POI, a lot of people saying, so how is it easy? How do I add a map? And it's just click and drag. So you can import it, and then anything you have in your selection, just map, we'll grab this guy here, and we drop him on the map. Done. He's now a part of the map. If I were to save and open it, it would be there inside the scenario. It wouldn't be a POI at this point, it would just be part of the map. It's the same way you expand the map as well, and you just click, drag, and put it on the side. Now your map is larger. So if I want to make it a POI, I would choose the POI type I want, and I think village is fine. Click and drag, and now a POI exists there. It wouldn't be in the scenario yet because we haven't edited it to add an owner. For a POI to be registered inside a scenario, you have to assign at least an owner and at least a culture, even if that owner is independent. So I could change the height and width here. Offset is where it puts the unit, so some of our POIs are a little oddly shaped, so we have an offset that just says place the heroes and agents X pixels away. Drag type is interesting, so we have road, sea road, trade, ley lines. So outside of putting POIs down, you can also click between POIs to make a road connection between them. You can also show them on the map, but it's incredibly ugly right now. Save, and let's move on to edit. So edit is where a lot of the labor is done. Although you build the map inside build, edit is the heavy lifting. So if I've built a POI, let's jump inside one. So the Vasily Enclave. You can see this is, again, this is what our actual GUI used to look like. So when you opened up this place, you would see this screen right here. Of course, without the ability to edit the information. So you can change stuff. It's all just input fields. Test new POI. Preview will give you a view of it that the person would see. Notice that you can edit population with granularity, but you can't edit culture. So you probably saw in the POIs prior that population is broken down into the classes. So you might have slaves, noblemen, landowners, things like that. And culture is the same. It's broken down into your neighbors' cultures and refugees, things like that. We don't allow you to set the culture at the beginning. We found it much more interesting to generate it dynamically. So if I were to set the culture here to be a different type, that would be its primary culture, but it would then look at its neighbors. How are you trading with them? Are they peaceful? How many of them are there compared to you? And it would adjust your culture. Also, all cultures have subcultures inside of them, which may or may not spawn to a certain percentage inside this POI. You can set terrain, shore. Shore is interesting because it's not just port or no port. We also have, is it on a lake or an ocean, because a lot of events that occur only in lakes or oceans. Generally good for you. Very fiendish things. Second turtle is set POI status. All input fields. So I want to make this more dangerous. I want to lower the order. So it's very lightweight. We made it very, very simple to go in and do all this. What you're not seeing here, and what we're not going to go into today because it would take a very long time, is controller, which is a nation, culture, which we talked about, and then the leader. So you need to have a leader of a nation, and you need to have a culture. Once those are done, it's very easy to just go through and add them to the POIs, but that's where the meat of the AI is in. Culture determines a lot of the personality traits of the people and their leaders, and the leader himself can determine the policies, which changes the entire spectrum of the game. So let's close this out, and what do we want to look at next? Scenario. So we had questions about how are we integrating the stretch goals? People wanted them to be optional, and I wanted to show this because it shows the way we've kind of taken everything and made it so it can be turned on, off, and or have greater or lesser impact on the game. So upper left, we'll go over the top first. Overview is very simple. Scenario name, the file name, author, description. That's the stuff you see when you click on it. Global's a little more interesting, so if we click on published, you'll see that you don't have core here. You can't select core. That's only if it's distributed with the game. But you do have game mode. We talked about game modes a lot. So in addition to scenarios, you also have game modes. If I selected game mode here and then I saved, it would save this as a game mode, which means it takes these values you're seeing here, which we'll talk about in a second, and there's also a lot more that you're not seeing on the screen. And then if someone were to select that game mode, so that's why we called it high gold, gold rush, and we set gold to 3, it would check and see that's an abnormal value for gold, and it would set gold to that in their game. So you can create very complicated statistical variations here, and then put it into any one of the scenarios and see how that works out. Debug and editor are just, can you do it inside the game? Violence doesn't actually do anything. We were thinking of having a toned down option for people, but it's excessive for everybody. Combat, you can auto it if you want. Agents, heroes, all. Events are custom, meaning there's custom events for this scenario. Most scenarios do have custom events. We can ignore statistics. So let's look at the bottom. We have weighted values for almost anything that is a number, a boolean, any metric inside of the game. So before it does its calculation, it checks to see what the global setting is. So Eldritch versus Fantasy, that's actually pretty unique. So every event has a setting which is Eldritch, Fantasy, or Mundane. You don't see Mundane here because it was added later on. So if I put 0.3 for Eldritch and 1.0 for Fantasy, that means you're much more likely to see fantasy-type events than you are to see Eldritch-type events. If you wanted more of a Lovecraftian influence, and that's what we mean by Eldritch, you could put that up to 1 and get rid of Fantasy, and you'd have an entirely bizarre, otherworldly game. H-spawn, B-spawn, that's just spawning rates of armies. Lore or lumber, that's the general resources. Sage lore is how much the sages research your return as you arise. So if you really wanted to be undiscovered, set that to 0 and they wouldn't do anything. Clues, how many spawn. Clue deciphering, how fast they decipher them. Skip over to leader B, actually is very interesting in the middle. It symbolizes how skilled leaders are. You set that to 2 or 3, then leaders that spawn are going to be geniuses. They're going to be very rational, they're going to have long-term strategies, and they won't be nearly as impulsive as most leaders are. Rage is very interesting. So higher the rage, the more people get annoyed when you frustrate their personality traits. So set that very high. If you do even a slight thing to annoy someone, they'll be furious. Diplo is how much people pull together. Alliance is how fast the alliance forms. Prophecy 1, 2, 3, those are all components of the prophecy system. So, like I said, there's actually about 2 or 3 more pages of this, and we're not going to go over that now, of course. So let's exit out of here, and let's move into the event window. So we're going to create a new one. Very ugly, like we were talking about before. We are going to overhaul this, but not until the beta launches. It's really a low priority. It's perfectly functional, it's just not very attractive. Also doesn't have any tooltips. So title, new event. And we are going to go through and actually create the event that won the design and event contest. We'll do that in the next video because it takes about half an hour because it's actually a rather complicated event. I'll talk very briefly about what you're seeing here. So settings for global old one here agent. This is the type of the event. It would take a long time to explain all that in detail. Is it a random event, part of a chain? Is it called by something else? Fancy Eldritch Mundane, we discussed that. Is it unlimited, so it can keep occurring, or is it limited? And if so, you can define it. When you select these, you may also see other options appear. Targets is interesting. Targets is essentially saying, is there a POI, a person, a leader involved in this? If so, you add the targets. You can have as many as you want, and then you can reference that as part of the entire event chain. Conditions is what condition it is for it to spawn. So you might say it's a random event that only occurs if you have 10 agents or if 2 agents have died. And refresh is similar. If you're saying it's a limited event, it can refresh every time you get a new agent power. And the plus over there will let you start adding options to the end of it, so decisions on how to handle this event. We're going to stop here for now. We have a lot to go over the next video with creating the event, and then we have even more after that as we go through the game and try to find the event, showing off the gameplay. But thank you again for supporting the campaign, and I look forward to the next video.